The global community is in disbelief. Experts are left dumbfounded by recent discoveries under the Temple Mount. While excavation on Jerusalem's Temple Mount has always been forbidden, an unauthorized building project 2 decades ago unearthed something significant. Visible from the Mount of Olives and uniquely located on the east, it's impossible to overlook. What has been intentionally concealed beneath the Temple Mount for nearly 4 millennia? And why has excavation always been prohibited? For countless generations, this site has been off-limits, untouched by direct digging. Yet, an unsettling pattern is now coming to light. Sealed chambers, blocked pathways, deep vertical shafts, and vast ancient water systems. These elements have only been revealed through seismic activity, renovations, and earth removed from restricted zones. What was once considered mere folklore now prompts a disquieting question. Was what lies beneath Jerusalem simply a victim of time, or was it purposely hidden from humanity? If this query troubles you, please stay. Acknowledge this moment with a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe, because secrets remain buried only when unobserved. Within Jerusalem's historical records, the Temple Mount holds a distinctive position, not solely for its mysterious aura, but for its continuous function. For almost 4,000 years, it has served as an enduring epicenter of devotion, power, and sacred identity for numerous civilizations. Ancient writings consistently identify this elevated plateau as the location of the first temple, constructed by Solomon, later demolished by Babylon. Subsequently, the second temple was erected under Zerubbabel and significantly expanded during the Herodian era before being destroyed by Roman forces in 70 AD. This established the Mount as a site repeatedly constructed, raised, and remembered, rather than forsaken. What sets the Temple Mount apart from almost every other ancient religious center is not a scarcity of historical references or physical remnants, but the absence of direct archaeological excavation on its surface. This restriction stems from persistent religious sensitivities and contemporary political realities, which transform even impartial scientific inquiry into a volatile act. Consequently, the Mount is among the most extensively documented sacred sites in literature, yet simultaneously one of the least physically examined locations in archaeology, creating a rare disparity between written history and tangible evidence. Because no excavation has ever been sanctioned on the Mount itself, all scientific comprehension of its architecture has been derived indirectly. This understanding comes from discoveries found beneath the platform, adjacent architectural exposures, records of renovations, and materials removed from the site under unusual circumstances. This reconstructive approach compels scholars to assign disproportionate significance to every fragment, every stone, and every structural anomaly, as each piece offers one of the few glimpses into a location that cannot be openly studied. In this context, the Temple Mount operates less like a conventional archaeological site and more like a sealed archive, where access is controlled, contents are partially observable, and interpretation must proceed with caution. The profound significance of this reality cannot be overstated. When a place so central to religious history remains physically undisturbed for millennia, the lack of excavation itself becomes part of the evidence, suggesting that what lies beneath the Mount is not merely ancient, but intentionally preserved within layers of stone, tradition, and restraint. Unlike nearly every other ancient religious complex globally, the Temple Mount exists under conditions that fundamentally alter how history is unearthed. Direct archaeological excavation on its surface is not merely discouraged, but expressly prohibited. This transforms the work of scientists into a meticulous process of reconstruction, carried out from fragments, peripheral areas, and unintended exposures, rather than deliberate digs. This restriction does not diminish the importance of archaeology at the site. Instead, it intensifies it. Every piece of data that emerges does so under pressure, limitation, and scrutiny, causing even the smallest finding to resonate far beyond its physical size. Without permission to excavate downwards through the mount itself, researchers have been compelled to rely on indirect avenues of discovery. These include structural renovations undertaken for maintenance rather than exploration, archaeological surveys conducted in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and soil that was removed from the mount and deposited elsewhere, later becoming the focus of systematic analysis. Each of these sources represents evidence that surfaced not because scholars were freely searching, but because the ground itself was disturbed, by necessity, accident, or administrative decision, giving the impression that the mount reveals its secrets only when compelled. One of the most significant events occurred in 1951, when renovations beneath the dome of the rock necessitated replacing the flooring. This routine intervention unexpectedly exposed massive stone walls buried beneath the surface. These walls, identified by their construction style and scale as belonging to the Second Temple period, were not isolated fragments, but substantial structures consistent with foundations or enclosure walls, implying that significant architectural elements remain embedded beneath the visible platform. The discovery did not stem from excavation plans or research agendas, but from a moment when access briefly coincided with necessity, allowing history to surface before being sealed once again. The implications of such findings extend far beyond architecture. When foundational structures appear where excavation is forbidden, they challenge assumptions about how much of the mount's original form still survives intact below modern layers. Scholars are left to question not whether remains exist, but how extensive they might be, and whether what has already been seen represents only the outer edge of a much larger buried system that cannot yet be examined. This is precisely why discoveries beneath the Temple Mount, even when partial or indirect, generate disproportionate global attention, as they emerge from a site that resists exploration, while simultaneously producing evidence too substantial to ignore. In a place where archaeology advances only through restriction, every revealed stone carries the weight of absence, hinting not only at what has been found, but at what remains deliberately out of reach beneath one of the most contested surfaces on Earth. And if discoveries of this scale emerge without excavation, what remains hidden, where no one is allowed to dig, may be far more unsettling. When the 1927 earthquake struck Jerusalem, the damage above ground was evident, quantifiable, and promptly addressed. Yet, what unfolded beneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque proved far more disconcerting than mere cracked walls or fractured stone. As engineers reinforced the foundations, layers of long-buried history, never intended to be seen, silently began to emerge. Beneath the mosque's floor, underground corridors appeared where none were expected. These passages did not resemble simple maintenance tunnels, but appeared deliberately constructed, aligned, and preserved, suggesting purposeful use rather than accidental survival. Alongside these passages, ancient marble floors were unearthed, polished and crafted with a refinement inconsistent with later Islamic construction phases. This raised immediate questions about who laid them and why their presence had never been documented in official records. As reinforcement work continued, large mosaic surfaces came to light, not fragmented debris, but expansive, patterned sections whose geometry and craftsmanship reflected a sophistication associated with imperial-era sacred architecture. It was here that comparisons became unavoidable, as one mosaic in particular displayed designs nearly identical to those found in the Church of the Nativity, a resemblance so precise that coincidence became increasingly difficult to defend. Such parallels quietly challenged long-held assumptions, not through explicit declaration, but through visual consistency that transcended religious boundaries and historical narratives, compelling experts to confront the possibility that earlier sacred structures once occupied this ground. The discoveries did not end with surfaces and corridors. Stairways were also revealed, descending at controlled angles and segmented by stone partitions that closely resembled Jewish mikveh, ritual purification baths designed for deliberate movement, separation, and sacred preparation. These stairways were neither random additions nor crude alterations, but carefully planned features consistent with ritual architecture, implying a system of worship embedded into the mount long before the current structure was raised. Together, corridors, floors, mosaics, and ritual stairways formed a layered architectural language that spoke of continuity rather than replacement, of succession rather than erasure. What makes these findings especially destabilizing is not merely their existence, but the context in which they appeared. None were uncovered through excavation, none were sought through academic initiative, and none were revealed with the intent to rewrite history. Yet once exposed, they refused to remain silent. They suggest that beneath Al-Aqsa lies not a single chapter of devotion, but a palimpsest of faiths, each built upon the other, each leaving traces too substantial to dismiss. And if an earthquake was enough to reveal this much, the question lingers uncomfortably. What else remains sealed beneath the mount, waiting for the ground itself to speak again? Beneath the revered dome of the rock, directly below the foundation stone, lies a subterranean chamber whose enigmatic nature baffles scholars precisely because it defies clear categorization, public access, and thorough investigation. This space, known as the Well of Souls, maintains its mystery not through fanciful tales, but through stringent restrictions. Far from being a natural cave-in or hastily constructed refuge, it presents as a deliberately shaped rectangular room, approximately 2 to 4 meters high, meticulously carved with an architectural precision that speaks of purposeful design rather than improvisation, and discreetness rather than ostentation. Along its walls, evenly spaced arched niches repeat with almost mechanical regularity, yet they are devoid of any ornamentation, inscriptions, or visual symbolism, a striking anomaly for any sacred or ceremonial site in Jerusalem, where decoration has historically served theological, mnemonic, or political ends. Thus, the chamber's austere nature is not one of emptiness, but of stern control, as if any meaning once held within was never intended for public display, vocalization, or remembrance. This impression deepens upon considering that access to the Well of Souls is among the most severely controlled beneath the mount, with entry seldom granted and observation strictly limited, solidifying a silence that appears deliberately maintained rather than accidental. Ancient accounts, fragmented and cautious, allude to further depths beneath this chamber, suggesting a vertical continuation rather than lateral expansion. These narratives describe lower spaces that were intentionally sealed at an early stage, not following a catastrophe, abandonment, or invasion, but while the structure itself remained intact. Such sealing implies prior knowledge, earlier access, and a conscious decision to enclose rather than obliterate, a distinction that profoundly reshapes our interpretation of this space, as concealment signifies preservation over erasure. These descriptions are conveyed not as sensational myths, but as reserved notations passed down without embellishment, which only enhances their credibility and mystique. The Well of Souls location intensifies its significance, as it lies directly beneath the foundation stone, long associated with creation, judgment, and divine presence, forging a vertical symbolic alignment that cannot be dismissed as mere chance. The chamber's proportions, its lack of embellishment, and its restricted access collectively hint at a function transcending ordinary ritual or storage, pointing instead to something requiring protection through obscurity. It is here that an ancient verse quietly resonates with renewed significance, not as a declaration, but as an introspection. In his hand are the deep places of the earth. Psalm 95:4. A statement that feels less abstract when uttered above a chamber whose lower reaches remain unseen. The Well of Souls remains one of the least investigated, yet most intriguing spaces beneath the Temple Mount, not due to what is understood, but because of what seems purposefully kept hidden, leaving the question lingering. Was this silence intended to endure perpetually? If this hidden depth beneath the Temple Mount intrigued you, please leave a like to indicate your continued engagement and stay with us as we unveil what was never meant for public gaze. Near the western wall, where solemn stones meet profound silence and centuries of history converge, archaeologists unearthed something that subtly challenged long-standing beliefs. Instead of a simple supporting foundation beneath the sacred platform, they discovered stairways purposefully descending into ancient chambers, revealing that the Temple Mount was never conceived as a single surface, but as a meticulously engineered vertical realm, constructed layer upon layer, with depth beneath height and secrecy beneath reverence. As excavations proceeded downwards, the architectural narrative began to defy expectations. The upper strata exhibited clear Byzantine characteristics, arches, masonry techniques, and spatial arrangements linked to later Christian presence. Yet, just beneath these layers, the structure abruptly transformed, giving way to massive stone blocks whose size, precision, and placement indicated an era predating Herod himself. This suggested that these were not random renovations accumulated over time, but components of a deliberate design whose logic extended downwards as intentionally as it rose upwards. What disconcerted researchers was not merely the antiquity of these lower stones, but the realization that the stairways were not emergency passages, storage corridors, or accidental voids left by collapse. Their angles, signs of wear, and alignment indicated consistent, purposeful use, as though successive generations descended into these depths with intention, fully aware of their destination and purpose. The deeper the investigation penetrated, the clearer it became that certain chambers had remained untouched in modern times, not because they were inaccessible, but because they appeared deliberately sealed, blocked by ancient barriers that withstood both time and entry, leaving entire sections unexplored even today. This discovery recontextualized the Temple Mount not as a flat ceremonial plaza supported by walls, but as a multi-tiered architectural mass whose true extent reached far beyond what was visible, extending downwards into zones where function, ritual, and restriction converged. Such vertical planning contradicts the notion that later civilizations merely built over earlier ruins without consideration, as the precision of the layers implies continuity rather than disorder. It is as if each era understood the sacred geometry beneath their feet and chose to preserve, adapt, or conceal what came before, rather than obliterating it. The unresolved question that continues to perplex experts is why some chambers remain inaccessible, while others were left open, as selective concealment points to intent rather than accident, protection rather than neglect, and purpose rather than decay. In this light, the Temple Mount begins to resemble less a monument frozen in time and more a sealed archive, organized not only across centuries, but across depths, where what lies below may have been considered too significant, too perilous, or too sacred to reveal. If this made you pause, leave a comment about what you believe was intended to remain buried beneath the mount. Beneath the stone surface of the Temple Mount, far removed from the areas where prayers are offered and conflicts arise, lies a hidden hydraulic system so immense and meticulously planned that it discredits the long-held assumption that this sacred complex lacked the practical infrastructure for large-scale operations. Ancient cisterns, deeply carved into the bedrock, extend beneath the mount like a buried circulatory network, while subterranean channels silently traverse the darkness, linking reservoirs, shafts, and collection points in a system designed not merely for survival, but for continuous operation. These were not small storage pits intended for emergencies, nor were they the makeshift solutions of a struggling community. They were engineered systems built with foresight, scale, and ritualistic necessity in mind. In the 19th century, explorers like Sir Charles Warren documented these subterranean structures with increasing astonishment, recording cisterns whose combined capacity surpassed 200 million gallons, a volume so vast that it could support not only daily usage, but also the enormous influx of pilgrims described in ancient texts. Aqueducts transported water over long distances, channeling it from Solomon's pools near Bethlehem to Jerusalem with remarkable precision, while rainwater collection systems captured seasonal flows and directed them into storage chambers carved directly beneath the mount itself. The deeper scholars investigated, the clearer it became that water was never an impediment here, despite centuries of assertions to the contrary. What makes this discovery unsettling is not merely the system's size, but the intent behind it. Such an extensive network only makes sense if the Temple Mount once functioned as a continuous hub of ritual activity, purification, and coordinated movement involving vast numbers of people. Water was crucial for cleansing, offerings, and ceremonial preparation, and the infrastructure beneath the mount suggests planners who anticipated pressure, volume, and repetition on a scale rarely acknowledged. This was not symbolic architecture intended solely to impress. It was operational, functional, and relentlessly practical, designed to keep a sacred machine running without interruption. As modern researchers trace these channels and map these reservoirs, the old argument that the temple could not have existed here due to a lack of water quietly crumbles, replaced by a much more profound realization that the mount was once engineered to sustain precisely the intense ritual life described in ancient texts. The silence of these underground systems, concealed for centuries beneath stone and controversy, now speaks louder than any inscription carved above ground. What makes the Temple Mount sifting project so disquieting is not just what was found, but how it was found. This evidence did not emerge from planned excavations or controlled digs, but from soil that had been forcibly removed, discarded, and nearly lost forever, as if history itself had been cast aside without care. More than 9,000 tons of earth, taken directly from the Temple Mount during unauthorized construction work, were relocated outside the old city. For most observers, that should have been the end of the story, except that a team of archaeologists chose to treat that soil not as debris, but as a sealed archive. What transpired was a meticulous, unhurried method of hand-sifting each small quantity of earth, gradually uncovering a trail of tangible proof that firmly resists oblivion. As each granule of soil underwent scrutiny, the findings began to amass with an unsettling regularity. This was because over 10,000 ancient coins emerged, covering various periods, yet heavily concentrated in eras linked to temple functions, implying economic transactions connected to devotion, offerings, and pilgrimages, rather than random habitation. Alongside the coins, fragments of mosaic floors, polished marble, and imported granite appeared, materials not indigenous to the area and never used for ordinary buildings. Instead, they signify monumental architecture constructed with deliberation, opulence, and symbolic intent. The discovery of stone from Egypt and Asia Minor subtly corroborates extensive trade networks that supplied a central institution demanding the finest available resources. Even more disturbing were the charred animal bones. Many displayed marks consistent with controlled exposure to fire, not accidental destruction, which aligns with sacrificial practices detailed in ancient ritual systems. These were not culinary remnants or household refuse, but the physical traces of organized ceremonial activity, preserved in soil that once lay beneath the city's holiest precinct. When dating techniques were applied, the results did not scatter haphazardly throughout history. Rather, they converged with known periods of temple utilization, creating a pattern difficult to dismiss as mere chance or contamination. What deeply troubles many scholars is that this evidence completely bypasses debates regarding access and politics, as it does not rely on interpreting existing walls or disputed locations, but on objects physically embedded within the mount itself. Soil does not migrate independently, and ritual debris does not spontaneously assemble. This means that what was recovered could only have originated from sustained activity above it. The sifting project effectively transformed what was intended to vanish into one of the most revealing archaeological datasets concerning the Temple Mount. And it achieved this without ever excavating on the mount proper. As each artifact was catalogued, a broader image began to emerge, not of myth or abstraction, but of a functioning ritual hub whose scale, intricacy, and continuity had been either underestimated or quietly overlooked. The cumulative weight of coins, stones, and bones does not loudly declare, but it steadily and relentlessly challenges assertions that the Temple Mount lacks physical confirmation of its ancient purpose. What has most disquieted researchers is not the existence of subterranean passages beneath the Temple Mount, as ancient cities are expected to possess substructures, but the unmistakable pattern indicating that several chambers were not lost to collapse, erosion, or time. Instead, they were deliberately sealed with precisely constructed stone walls that bisect corridors mid-passage, obstruct access points at crucial junctures, and enclose spaces that appear structurally sound. These closures do not resemble emergency repairs or later encroachments. Rather, they bear the hallmark of intentional concealment, executed carefully enough to preserve what lay beyond them, rather than to destroy it. The absence of any official historical record explaining why these chambers were closed only intensifies the unease, given that ancient societies meticulously documented nearly everything of significance, particularly when sacred or strategic architecture was involved. Even more perplexing are the deep vertical shafts that descend dozens of meters into the bedrock beneath the mount. Shafts that defy easy classification and resist alignment with known civilian, defensive, or drainage systems. Some of these shafts intersect with water networks, yet others terminate in darkness without clear functional endpoints, creating architectural dead zones that serve no practical purpose, unless their value lay in access, separation, or concealment rather than movement. Their narrow profiles and extreme depth would have made routine use arduous, if not perilous, suggesting they were never intended for regular traffic, but instead for restricted entry, controlled descent, or symbolic delineation between spatial levels. What troubles experts is that these features do not behave like forgotten infrastructure, because neglected systems undergo organic decay, collapse inconsistently, and display signs of adaptation over time. In contrast, these chambers and shafts exhibit indications of deliberate closure at times when the surrounding architecture remained active. Stone seals were placed where passage was once possible, implying a decision was made to prevent access rather than abandon use. And such decisions are rarely taken lightly in sacred precincts, where space itself held theological significance. The notion that something was deliberately hidden beneath the most contested religious site on earth forces a shift in perspective, because concealment implies knowledge, and knowledge implies purpose. It is in this context that ancient words resonate with unsettling clarity. Surely the Lord God does nothing unless he reveals his secret. This statement echoes through these sealed thresholds, not as an answer, but as a warning that secrets once embedded in stone are rarely meant to remain buried forever. The deeper scholars investigate these sealed voids, the more they encounter silence instead of clarity, and that silence has become one of the most powerful pieces of evidence itself. This is the point where conversations grow quieter, where academic language becomes cautious, and where many researchers, confronted with architecture that suggests intention rather than accident, simply stop speaking. The accumulated evidence leaves little room for dismissal, because the Temple Mount no longer appears as a symbolic idea preserved only in texts, but as a real, operational center of worship, ritual practice, and advanced engineering, whose physical footprint continues to emerge despite extraordinary restrictions. What has surfaced from beneath, beside, and beyond the mount consistently aligns with ancient scripture, mirrors historical records from multiple eras, and withstands modern scientific scrutiny, forming a convergence difficult to explain away as coincidence or legend. Each discovery reinforces the same conclusion. This was a living system, intentionally designed, meticulously maintained, and later deliberately obscured rather than erased. Yet, what may be most unsettling is not what has already been identified, but what remains unreachable. This is because numerous critical structures beneath the mount are still sealed, heavily restricted, or entirely unexplored, leaving gaps that modern archaeology is unable to bridge. The sealed chambers, inaccessible shafts, and layered substructures suggest that the narrative beneath Jerusalem is incomplete and possibly paused rather than finished, waiting beneath stone that was placed to conceal rather than protect. In a place where history, faith, and power converge, the decision to seal rather than destroy carries a weight that cannot be overlooked. The most disturbing possibility, therefore, remains unresolved, because discoveries capable of reshaping global understanding may still lie deeper beneath the Temple Mount, untouched, unseen, and deliberately hidden from view. What has already been uncovered may only be the outer edge of a much larger truth. If this message made you stop and think, share it with others. Leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to remain watchful.